Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall is calling for changes to equalization, saying the current system is unfair. Conservative leader Stephen Harper was quick to brush off his concerns.
Look, I think that is not really the central question that I think the Premier and, frankly, for that matter, most people in Saskatchewan should be concerned about. The real issue around this is resource development. This is a province that depends on the development and sale of its natural resources.
Well, joining me now is the Premier of Saskatchewan, Brad Wall. Welcome back to the House.
Thanks, Chris.
Were you surprised to hear Stephen Harper dismiss your concerns about equalization?
I don't know about surprised, but disappointed. We have a 3-month campaign, basically, and if we can't talk about that issue now, then when? I understand. I'm not naive enough to, ignore the fact that it's a controversial issue for all the leaders, and I haven't heard any of the major leaders of the major parties engage on the issue. So I'm not surprised because it's a difficult issue, but it is a $17 billion federal program that is in need of some updating. If we can't talk about what those updates might be and how they could work for the country, maybe better for Canadians now during this federal campaign, I'm not sure when we can talk about it.
All right, well, let's talk about specifically what you're worried about. Is it how natural resources some are excluded and some are included? Is that the primary concern you have?
Well, two major concerns. First of all, Chris, I want to say that Saskatchewan people are very grateful for the fact that we've benefited and aware that we've benefited from this program for a number of years. Whether we should have or shouldn't have, based on our resources, is a debate for us here in Saskatchewan, but we're grateful the program was there. We begrudge no one who currently receives. But one change we'd like to make, though, to modernize it, to make it more reflective of current realities around resources, is to include hydro in the calculation, which is right now excluded. So provinces who have the advantage of fossil fuels, like Saskatchewan, need to include that in the formula. I have no argument with that at all. But we would also argue that those provinces that have the great advantage of hydro that others don't have should probably have to have that included in their calculation of economic capacity as well. Point number one. Point number two, there's this great lag in the program right now, 3 to 5 year lag in terms of the calculus, so that the reality of resource prices, for example, may not be reflective in the policy for 5 years, which leaves the prospect of, I'll say, Albertans, and leave Saskatchewan out of it. Albertans will fund their share, probably $2 billion of the $17 billion program, even though they're getting hammered by $40 oil and there's massive layoffs. And this lag might last for 5 years. So can we shorten the lag and can we include hydro?
All right. The argument about the lag, though, is that it alleviates the sudden sort of jump or loss in revenues for a province.
I understand that. I think we can alleviate that without having it last potentially 5 years. And that's the concern.
Okay. Before I leave this topic, I can't help but think that there was a premier in Newfoundland named Danny Williams who tried to get Stephen Harper to move on the resource question and equalization. A slightly different issue, but it isn't one that any party leader really wants to open. So why do you think it might be different this time?
Well, I just think it's a $17 billion program, a federal program, as I've mentioned, and we have a very long election campaign. And so if there's ever been a chance for us to have some sort of a national discussion of it, we should. It's a principle enshrined in the charter as well, but, do we want to look at something other than the current formula? I think there's a need for the program in Atlantic Canada, but half of the monies in equalization have gone to the province of Quebec over the years. That's the case this year. And this is a very populous province with a 400-year-old economy. And would Quebec be better off if the program focused in terms of its equalization support in Atlantic Canada, and then maybe some portion of it, maybe up to half of it, could be dedicated to infrastructure, where larger provinces on a per capita basis like Quebec will benefit to a greater extent? I think if we're investing in the infrastructure this country desperately needs, it'll be a great advantage to all of Canada, including the populous provinces that might also be recipients right now. Again, I just say I understand it's controversial. I'm very aware of that, but it's a long election campaign, so maybe we can have a chat about it. It's in the letter that we sent to all three major leaders for their commentary.
I'm glad you raised that, because I was going to ask you if you've heard back from any of them.
No, and to be fair, we just sent it. We had our caucus retreat last week, and so I wanted to get the input of my colleagues, and we've just sent the letter a week ago. So we hope to hear back soon. Equalization's part of it, but not the only part. We also want to hear back from the leaders with respect to energy policy, with respect to sort of the intersect of energy and the environment as well, and the issue of GMO and crop science as well.
Okay. How big an issue is this for you? I mean, if you don't hear back, or if you hear back answers that you don't like, are you prepared to enter the campaign in some way and make it an issue in Saskatchewan?
Well, we'll reveal the responses we get and try to evaluate them from the perspective of what's best for Saskatchewan. We're not going to be engaged in the federal campaign as some other premiers perhaps are, and it's up to them to do that. That's fine. That's their decision. The Saskatchewan Party, as I've been saying, is not running any federal candidates in this election campaign. So we will look at the platforms and the announcements of the party leaders and their response to the letter that we've sent through that filter, through that lens of, what do we think's best for Saskatchewan going forward, and we'll make a comment thereafter.
Okay, sorry, I want to make sure I understand that. If you get an answer from one of the party leaders that addresses the issues you've raised in a way that you accept it, you would urge people to vote that way or endorse that party federally in your own province?
No, I think what you'd see us do is analyze the answers and say, from our perspective, we think this is good or not so good for the province. Make that public, and people can make up their own minds.
All right, I want to turn the attention to the economy because the price of oil is down to around $40 a barrel. Clearly, the economy, we saw stock exchanges right across the country this week shedding a lot of value. Are you hearing much discussion about the economy in this campaign, or enough discussion about the economy?
Not enough, and it's a great question, Chris. It's remarkable that we've heard as little as we have. Obviously, a certain trial underway in Canada is taking up a lot of oxygen, and I understand that. It's politics after all, and it's an election campaign. I get that. But I hope we begin to focus very, very directly on the economy of this country for the reasons that you've mentioned, what's happening with respect to markets, but the implication in the job market. We see the layoffs in Western Canada, layoffs in the energy sector. We're a bit more fortunate in Saskatchewan. We have a diversified economy to the extent we have other resources, and agriculture still relatively strong, but we're feeling it here as well. Mm-hmm. And the nation's feeling it. There are thousands of jobs in central Canada and the rest of this country that relate directly to the energy sector. A lot of those are in jeopardy potentially, and some have been lost already. And just in a general sense, we should be focused on what does Canada need to do to remain competitive? What do we need to do to come through this time of economic softness, led principally by low oil prices, but not exclusively? How do we come through this period of time and make sure we come out on the other end in a strengthened position?
There is a debate coming up on September the 17th. It's dedicated solely to the leaders looking at the economy. So what questions are you pushing now that need to be addressed specifically? You've heard something about infrastructure. What else would be part of that discussion?
Well, energy transportation has to be at the top of the list as an economic issue. Eventually prices for oil are going to come back. I don't know if they'll ever be $100 right away, but they're going to come back and they will strengthen. And we have to decide as Canadians, are we comfortable with the fact that we have the third greatest oil reserves on the planet? And therefore, are we comfortable in getting it to market? Because right now, Canadians across the country sell our oil at a discount. We've got one customer in the United States. We don't get it to Tidewater, so therefore we do not get the Brent price. We don't get value for it. We don't maximize opportunities to add value to this energy resource, which at the very least will continue to be a transition source of energy for a very long time. So that's a principal question we have to ask, is pipeline policy, transportation, and also just generally, I believe that fiscal probity needs to be the cornerstone of a growth plan. So how are we going to ensure the budget stays balanced? How will we continue with a competitive tax environment in Canada? And so all of these issues should be very much part of the debate, and I'm looking forward to the hope that they will be part of the debate soon.
Yeah, one last question on the pipelines, because you mentioned this country has one customer led by a CEO named Barack Obama still, who has held up decisions on about the Keystone XL pipeline, a key thing, and has now opened up the Arctic to drilling to U.S. companies. So were you surprised by that, and what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that Keystone, the decision on Keystone is more about NGOs in Hollywood. And I frankly think the president and the administration's made promises long ago to those that have supported the administration politically. And we're at where we're at with no approval for the pipeline. And if it's done on the basis of, if the denial comes on the basis of environmental questions, it completely misses the point that without the pipeline, oil has been moving by rail and has been increasing exponentially by rail, which has greater environmental risks and a greater greenhouse gas footprint. So there's not, I don't see the rationale for a denial, but it looks like that's how it's lining up.
All right. Premier Bradwell, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Chris.